None of us understand what's coming, and we must in order to act with integrity today. When I say that, you likely think of politics first, which makes sense, but I'm a biology teacher, and there are things happening and coming that could make all politics irrelevant. While they're connected, and I'll get to that at the end, for now let's zoom out from the individual trees and look at what's happening with the whole forest. Talk about a couple of things that mostly only scientists are paying attention to today. The beginning of this may be familiar, but it builds to pieces I expect you're not aware of, and we must be. Many people understand that CO2 emissions are concentrating in the atmosphere, causing climate change. That's true. It's also a little misleading, because it turns out CO2 has been concentrating somewhere else that is arguably much more important, and that's the ocean. The ocean has been acting as a giant sponge, soaking up over a quarter of emitted CO2. Quarter may not sound like much, but there's a fallacy of scale to beware of there. We're currently producing about 40 billion tons of CO2 annually. The ocean's been absorbing about 10 billion tons per year. That is the total amount of CO2 that we were producing annually on this planet in 1965. There's two things to be aware of around this. The first is that the rate of CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere has been drastically slowed. In the next couple of decades, the sponge is going to get full, and the rate of CO2 going straight into the atmosphere is going to skyrocket. It'll be the equivalent of multiplying our current CO2 emissions by over 1.25, and that is with CO2 emissions continuing to rise every year. The other piece of this is what it means for the ocean. Salt water absorbs CO2 in a way that makes it more acidic. You may have heard the term ocean acidification. That's an effect of oceanic CO2 absorption. What does it mean that the ocean is turning into acid? Well, as with any vast ecosystem change, we genuinely have no idea, but there are a few details we know, little things, like the fact that every form of marine life that makes a shell, from clams to barnacles to coral polyps, which make coral reefs, use calcium carbonate from the water to make their shells. And there is a pH threshold under which calcium carbonate shells can no longer exist in seawater for the same reason that a loose tooth will dissolve in a cup of soda. The acid melts the calcium. Once ocean acidification crosses that threshold, then marine life will not only be unable to make new shells, all the shells in the ocean will dissolve and crumble. There will be no more clams or crabs or coral reefs. That's not just a seafood shortage. Mollusks, like clams and oysters and barnacles, are the liver of the ocean. They are filter feeders whose ecological role is to keep the water clean. And they do that on a scale that human infrastructure just can't even imagine. Mollusks live on, like, every inch of shoreline other than the polar caps, and their absence will be a literal sea change of what the ocean is. Ocean acidification at the scale we're facing will trigger full-blown ecosystem collapse that will affect all life on Earth. In many ways, this is more serious to the biosphere than atmospheric CO2 for a couple of reasons. Past what we just covered, did you know that over half the oxygen you breathe is not converted by trees or land plants? It's converted by marine plants, mostly phytoplankton. Hard to say exactly how ocean acidification will affect phytoplankton. In any changing system, a couple species thrive, and maybe things will be great for them. But pH changes are rough on plants in general. Most plants evolve and can only live in a pretty narrow band of acidity. So if ocean acidification and the subsequent marine impacts are bad for phytoplankton, which they very likely will be, we could lose half of the produced oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen constitutes 20% of the atmosphere at sea level. There's a bunch of variables that could affect this. We really don't know, but let's just take that for a spin by the initial math. If we lose half of the oxygen and the oxygen concentration crashes by 50%, that could make sea level oxygen levels fall to 10%. That is the equivalent of the oxygen level 3.5 miles in the air, like at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro or Denali. I don't know what percentage of the population could survive at those oxygen levels, but the impacts of this kind of oxygen collapse on its own, without any other variables at play, would be apocalyptic. So I can't tell you how serious global marine ecosystem collapse would be for two reasons. First is that I literally cannot imagine it myself. And the second is that no one knows. No one knows what's coming, and no one can imagine how serious this is. Add to that some of the effects we can predict around coral reefs. Coral reefs provide natural organic wave breaks throughout the equatorial zones of this planet. We're used to waves in the Caribbean or the South Pacific being at 2 to 10 feet on average. Storms push them up to 20 or 30 feet. Some areas have much larger, some smaller. But that baseline is created by coral reefs. And when the reefs dissolve, the baseline of shoreline waves will be multiplied by some number that's hard to estimate, but it'll be larger than 1. Even if it's only 2, which is a wild underestimation, that means we're looking at 4 to 20-foot waves as a baseline. That's full storm-level waves, 24/7. If it's 5, that means a baseline of 10 to 50-foot waves. We're talking beyond hurricane-level waves, 24/7. The unmitigated force of the open ocean is so far beyond what most people can conceive of, and without coral reefs, it will be unleashed on the coasts of the equatorial shorelines of this planet. Storm surges are going to become apocalyptic in coastal communities and drive erosion in ways we can't imagine. Add to that sea level rise. As a scientist, let me explain something about science. By its nature, science is wildly conservative. Science, especially predictive science, needs to stand up to hardcore scrutiny and peer review. So it can't say most of what is true. It can only say what can be absolutely proven. That means that all predictive models are extreme underestimations of what's about to happen. And there's no better example of this than the common understanding of how polar ice melt relates to sea level rise. At the polar caps of this planet, there are billions of metric tons of ice suspended in shelves hundreds to thousands of feet above sea level. When scientists began predictive modeling, they calculated the temperature rise and how quickly that temperature would melt the ice. This was pure, demonstrable, indisputable math, and it painted a dire enough picture that any sane person would see the need for action. It was in the 70s through the 90s. And they watched. And what did they see? As soon as the ice started to melt, just a little, all that thawing water flowed down between the cracks in the ice and lubricated the bottom, turned frozen ground into mud, and created growing pockets of water under the ice sheets that destabilized it and immediately began breaking them apart, sending huge chunks crumbling into the ocean. So rather than a mathematically steady melting of ice under increasing heat, like an ice cube sitting on a table in a room, what's actually happening is an exponentially accelerating collapse of the entire ice sheets. And remember, the ice doesn't need to melt to raise the sea level, it just needs to fall. On this note, the combination of factors in climate change are beginning to collapse the Gulf Stream, the ocean currents of the Atlantic. This is not futuristic, this is happening now, and it's the first domino in the collapse of the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. Despite the name, this is a global ocean current that looks like this. It's why the west coast of Europe and the west coast of the US are so much warmer than the east coast of the US, despite being at the same latitude. It's also why 90% of the trash in the ocean spins around at the same spot in the Pacific, in a trash country twice the size of Texas. Anyway, the Gulf Stream and then the rest of AMOC collapse. Ocean currents, and therefore climates, are going to become chaotic and unstable. The coast of Europe and the west coast of the US will get much colder. East coast of the US, where I live, will get much warmer. This is one of many reasons that the scientific community doesn't tend to call climate change global warming anymore. It's more commonly called climate destabilization. This is why we're already seeing an increase in ocean storms, and that's only going to grow in our lifetimes as AMOC crashes. The unimaginable power of the ocean is going to break free from the consistent currents that it's danced in for all of human history and begin just smashing around in unchecked and unpredictable ways. The storm surges that we discussed becoming apocalyptic with coral reef collapse will happen more and more often. Seasonal patterns that have defined ecosystems around the world will become wholly unreliable. Let's be clear, this is already happening. Last summer, here in my home of Maine, we received less than 2 inches of rain all summer. It was an extreme drought, technically, the likes of which I've never seen before. This is a rainforest. Nobody thinks of it that way because it gets cold, but it's really wet here. This summer is predicted to be the same level of extreme drought. That's 2 years of extreme climate that my home has never experienced before. We've had dry years, never like this. Permanent springs, dry for months. Wells collapsing, full of dust. The forest floor, which should be soft, damp moss and leaves, crumbling to fine powder and puffing up around your feet as you walk. But let's be equally clear. What we're seeing is the very tip of the beginning of what's coming. We are about to see what global system collapse looks like. The process of land becoming desert is called desertification, and climate change on top of global corporate monocropping will drive that like a blowtorch to dry leaves. There is nowhere on this earth that it will not touch. Much of New York City will be underwater within my natural lifetime. I will live to see the last moose and the last new maple tree in Maine. The examples of this are endless because what's happening and what's coming touches all parts of the biosphere. It's hard to describe how fast the climate is changing. Just a couple very quick examples. When I was a kid driving down the road at night, it was just a world of insects. You had to run the windshield wipers every couple minutes to clear off all the smushed bugs. Today, a bug hitting my windshield at night is kind of a rarity. That is the collapse of the foundation of an ecosystem. And it is going to have a domino effect up the trophic levels and will impact everything. When I was a child, there was regularly 4 to 6 feet of snow on the ground here in the winter. These years, rare to have more than 6 inches on the ground. 4 inches of snow is now called a blizzard. When I was a kid, that would be a flurry. Blizzard meant multiple feet at once. I'm not even 40. 20 years ago, I saw negative 40 degrees on the thermometer. Often, every winter, we had months where it didn't break zero. Today, sub-zero temps are a rarity. For climate to change that fast, that visibly, within a human lifespan, let alone a mere decade, is like light speed climate change. In a stable climate, change like that takes centuries at least. Climate change is like falling over a round waterfall. As you fall, momentum builds exponentially. We are getting to that point of exponential acceleration. Let's look at these things together. With the collapse of AMOC, we're going to see pockets of ocean stagnation. Water that was moving will now sit. The primary filter organisms of the ocean, the mollusks, will no longer be alive, so there will be a level of rot in the acidic ocean that we have never seen before. We're about to see a climate refugee crisis on a scale that no one is prepared for. We're going to see food shortages due to ecosystem collapse of arable land where you can grow things, and that's before we add other variables, and there will be other variables. Since industrialization, the percentage of an average human's diet that is cereal grains, mostly rice, wheat, and corn, has been steadily skyrocketing. It's now way over 50% of the average human's caloric intake. And that's before we include things like livestock feed and soda. When you include those, the average U.S. citizen's body is made of over 70% corn. And modern corn production is genetically identical. The rich biodiversity of our ancestors' multicolored, multifaceted corn is gone. And this means that a single corn pathogen that spreads faster than industrial-grade antibiotics can stop it would lead to a total collapse of corn production in the world and instantly remove 70% of the U.S. food supply. We've built a leaning tower of toothpicks out over a cliff, and we are all precariously balanced on it, way over the edge of sanity or sustainability. Many of us think we know this, but we don't really, and we certainly don't act like it. One of the things I taught in 7th grade biology was population dynamics. If you remember this, or if you were in my population dynamics section, you know that there are 2 types of population growth. There's exponential, and there's logistic. Logistic growth is slow and steady. Population slowly rises until it hits carrying capacity, and then it evens out, like this. Exponential growth is explosive. Population spikes way above carrying capacity, and in all the world, there's only ever one thing that follows a spike like that. It's a crash. Sometimes that's the end of the species, but that's rare. More often, the population crashes way below carrying capacity, and then there's a series of decreasingly severe fluctuations until it hits carrying capacity. The point is, when anyone with even a solid junior high level of biology sees this, they know that this is coming. This is a graph of the human population over time. I don't know what will cause this crash. The things that traditionally limit population growth, in order, are resource scarcity, predation, and disease. Humans have artificially bypassed all of those in unprecedented ways. We are now in genuinely uncharted territory. That doesn't mean one of them might not still bite us. Human population density today means that a serious disease that we couldn't beat could make the Black Plague look like a common cold. But we might be about to find the 4th population limiter. I'll add this bit of trivia. When chickens have healthy space and enough resources, they're nice to one another. When chickens don't have enough space and they're cramped, they begin to hurt one another. When their space becomes super constrained, they're packed in too tight, can't move or breathe, they begin to hurt themselves. Human brains and chicken brains are very different, but they're much more similar than they are different. And it looks to me as though we're hitting a stage of human society where we are actively self-harming. If we had healthy and functional structures of government, there would be things we could do to prepare for this and mitigate harm. There's no stopping this now. We are on this ride. The question is how we'll respond to it and where we'll land. Current governments do have a plan. Their plan is escalating fascism until the Earth becomes uninhabitable, and then some combination of bunkers, space travel, and graphing consciousness into robots. They are investing in militarized police and AI rather than doing anything that would actually address these challenges. The wealth gap today is far more severe than it was in France before the French started separating monarchs from their heads a couple centuries ago. The rich know all of this. They know what's coming. They know that the exploitation they're perpetrating is not only unsustainable, they know that the escalation they're doing today is giving away the game. Every penny of inflation is another penny of theft from the poor to the rich. That's all it is. They understand that their propaganda cannot stay ahead of the building outrage of the working class, and they know that what they're doing will precipitate a mass resistance to this entire system, but they don't care, because this is their end game. This power grab is unlike any other in human history because of what this video started with. Things are about to radically change, no matter what anyone does. The rich want all the money so they can build bunkers and spaceships and leave the rest of us to starve or choke or turn on each other while they create a tiny subset of safety that will define privilege in a brand new way. As in, less than 0.01% of the population has breathable air and drinkable water, while the rest of us live through Mad Max and mostly don't survive. So the question now is this. Given the imminent population crash that any competent high schooler can see is coming when looking at the human population chart and the circumstances we're in, what is the percentage of humans that will survive? I don't mean what numerical percentage, as in 1 versus 4%. It doesn't matter too much. I mean what survival strategies will survive. What kind of humanity will survive? The Billionaire Island crowd has an answer to that question, and they have plans. They've had those plans for a long time, and the entire controversy about climate change has been part of those plans to buy them time. Let's be crystal clear. They are clinically psychotic. Brain scans of the rich show that they lack the capacity for empathy in the same way that psychopaths do. Hence the islands, and the pattern of viciously making the entire world as horrible as possible, as fast as possible, to line their pockets. From Elon and Bill Gates to the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, these people embody and represent the absolute worst of what humanity can be. And if they are allowed to be the survival strategy that survives the coming population crash, then what rises from the ashes will be a horror story that puts every apocalyptic dystopian fiction to shame. It will be their island across the entire world with zero need for secrecy or shame. They will joyfully fly their private jets over our rotting bodies while they feast on our children's corpses and do worse. That will be the world we leave to the next generations. Please remember, I'm a science teacher when I say this. This is a scientific statement, not a political one. Humans are a collective species. We are not individuals the way spiders are. We only live and thrive in groups through mutual aid. It is through supporting one another that humans evolved, and it's the only way we can live. It takes 15 years to raise a human child to adulthood. For most of human history, that was almost half of a human lifespan. Do you understand what that means? It took an entire village. It has never been and can never be one individual or one family unit trying to survive alone. That's a billionaire fiction. It's propaganda. Humans define the extreme end of collective living, and it is only through mutual aid that we could or can do that. The whole dominant alpha male narrative is a lie, designed to make us stay subservient to the billionaire class. We evolved in egalitarian, matriarchal communities, and if there is any healthy future for humanity, it's in those same egalitarian, matriarchal communities that we evolved in, not some billionaire, psychopath, sci-fi, dystopian wet dream. This means that two things must happen. The first is that we must tend the seeds that we want to grow, particularly indigenous, matriarchal, egalitarian communities, and follow their leadership. My wife, who's an indigenous woman, calls this countergrowth, creating systems that replace the current systems and do a better job. Alternative education, independent food production and distribution, independent healthcare and resource sharing, free stores, conflict mediation, radical art. There are so many avenues of countergrowth. And it's not binary. Some of this work overlaps. Local free health clinics exist within the current system, kind of, but are also radical acts of countergrowth. They have a place in a healthier world, if you see what I mean. As the current system collapses and the ecosystems collapse and the climate changes, where can people turn in your local community to help one another? There are right-wing groups organizing across the entire country specifically to take control when things get worse. They know what's coming and they want to be warlords. They will commit unspeakable violence, claim resources, and offer your sons and the young men in your community food, weapons, and identity. Unless you are organized to offer them something better, then your community is already lost, and in doing so, supported the billionaires' plans. The second thing that must happen is that the billionaires' plans must be stopped by any means necessary. The very gentle end of that spectrum would be taxing them out of existence. Institute 100% tax on every penny of earnings and holdings over, say, $10 million. $10 million is all anyone needs, my God. To make this work, we would also dissolve corporate personhood. There'd be no more corporations. If you and your friends want to pool your $10 million caps, you can do so to create a $100 million company, but you are personally liable for every penny of it, and every penny of that company is part of the tax structure that every individual carries. So if you have $1 million home and $1 million of income, then you can only have $8 million of equity in a company before every penny past that is taxed at 100%. Let me tell you a story. When the Spaniards landed in what's now Mexico, they brought priests, and the priests recorded a lot of what they saw of that early contact. They encountered the Aztec Empire, which was huge and powerful and had serious income inequality. One priest recorded this experience. An indigenous warrior from the wildlands was being given a tour of the Aztec capital to show off its splendor. There were huge mansions where the rich lived, and then there were beggars on the street. The warrior was confused. When he understood what was happening, he was even more confused, and he said, "Why do those who not have enough simply grab those who have taken too much by the throat, hold them up, and shake them until everything they need falls out?" That is a healthy human perspective on income inequality. Would you sit at a table where you have a feast on your plate and your family starves in front of you, offering them nothing? If you were one of those people who had nothing at that table, would you watch just one person gorge themselves on a feast while the rest of your family starves? Or would you do something? Now add to that the current reality. If you do nothing and watch your family starves, then the person who gorges themselves will be the one to define the entire future of humanity on the other side of this population crash, which is coming. So you are choosing what kind of humanity will exist in the future. All our minds will immediately insert the propaganda of the billionaires because they wrote the history and the ethics and the biology textbooks that we all studied. Through my childhood, McGraw-Hill Textbooks, who published books for 92% of school districts, was funded by Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. It's one tiny club, and you ain't in it. They intentionally taught you how and what to think, and once we begin to see that, it gets very clear that we were lied to. So any part of us that thinks, well, is that fair? They earned it. That is what they taught us to think, and it's a lie. They inherited their wealth from the most evil people of the previous generations, and then they stole every penny they could from workers and exploited the natural world in catastrophic ways. Those are the only ways to make that kind of money. You cannot become a billionaire through hard work, or every single working mother would be. Jeff Bezos said that he wants all Amazon workers to come to work afraid. That's the world he's creating. Do you want to live your entire life afraid? Do you want your children and community to live in fear their entire lives? If not, then you do not agree with how Jeff Bezos and friends make their money. Some part of us might think, yeah, some people just get lucky. No, it's the system that they built and they maintain. It would be cheaper and easier to build a world where everyone's needs are met. The U.S. pays, 5 times more for healthcare per person than any country with universal healthcare, and almost no one's needs are met. Mine aren't. Are yours? We could cut that expenditure in half, make coverage universal, and have the best healthcare system in the world that was free and available to everyone. But the rich would rather spend more money and have us live in fear and scarcity. That's the goal, because it gives them more power. They sell it to us with the idea that people shouldn't get something they didn't pay for, which is complete nonsense. They take trillions in bailouts every chance they get. That is our money that they didn't earn, but somehow their ethic of people not getting things they didn't earn doesn't count when it comes to them taking our money, only the other way. So every time we think that billionaires got lucky or earned what they have, we are empowering and internalizing their lies. Jeff Bezos is not lucky. He did not work harder. He's a bloated, vicious parasite pouring poison into your ears and your children's ears to make you ignore the fact that he's stealing every penny he can from you and your community. That's what's happening. In a healthy human society, there is some wealth disparity, but it's like 10%. That family has a much nicer blanket than our family does, so they're rich. We have 30 goats. They only have 20 goats, so we're rich. That ethical model is how the rich want us to think of the wealth gap today, and it's a lie. To earn what Elon Musk has today at minimum wage with 0 expenses, how long do you think you'd have to work? 1,000 years? 10,000 years? 50,000 years? No. It would take you 70,000 years of nonstop work with 0 expenses. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is not jealousy over a nicer blanket. This is who runs the world. What I'm saying is that us letting them do that is not only an abandonment of ourselves and our own lives and families, it's an abandonment of the entire future of our species and the world. For the world to be any better tomorrow, let alone in 500 years, they must be stopped. The rich are a giant, all-consuming maw, And they are not just eating your life, your health, your family's happiness. They are eating the entire future. In the arc of history, all that matters in our lives is how effectively we stop the rich from eating the future. That is all that will be remembered in 1,000 years. Will our efforts be some joke, some chuckle in the propaganda histories published by McGraw-Hill for the billionaire class in their bunkers about how some stupid Luddites tried to stop the natural flow of the New World Order, teaching our resistance as ill-fated struggle against evolution? Or will we be remembered by healthy human communities as heroes who turned the tide and brought humanity back to its heart? One way or another, this is the end game. If billionaires win, then the future is a horrifying place, where meaningful resistance becomes 1 billion times harder for anyone who's left, because there won't be drinkable water or breathable air. This is the last moment where the literal climate and ecology of this planet will give us this level of stability for organizing and resistance. So what are we doing? Look for leaders. Don't look at me. On the larger scale, look to people like Adrienne Marie Brown. She's the kind of person I follow for good reasons. Don't ask me how to do this or what to do. I don't know. Go read her book, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds. Locally, look for women of color, especially Indigenous women. In Maine, follow Sherry Mitchell. She's a Penobscot matriarch, community leader, lawyer, grandmother. She wrote a book called Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. It's about exactly how to live and change on her land, on Wabanakieck, here where I stand. Read it. Live it. Clarify who you'll fight for. Who will you lay down your life for? For me, that's Sherry. She tells me it's time to go to war. I ask no questions and take up arms. The U.S. government tells me to go to war. I laugh. That's countergrowth. Sherry's leadership grows over the leadership of the U.S. government for me. That countergrowth grounds me. I don't need to decide when to take up arms. I don't, and I shouldn't. I just need to trust local Indigenous matriarchs to tell me. Within that, I need to foster countergrowth locally and do everything I can to stop billionaires, most effectively with the tools I have, like this video. A friend of mine locally said at an MLK speech, no one is coming to save you. No one's coming to save us. He's right. If we don't act, we give the future to them. And remember, they did this. The collapse of marine life, the collapse of ocean currents, the fact that there are no bugs, will be no moose, the upcoming mass food shortages, climate refugee crisis, the collapse of the whole biosphere, that's the direct result of the exploitative, individualistic, colonial mindset of the billionaire class. Their control has driven this planet off the edge, and now we are falling. Will you let them determine where we land? Or will you pick up your rights and your responsibilities for your family and for the future and steer us towards a better world? Most of our family lines will be gone in a century or two. But right now, we have the power to do something far more powerful than just keeping a family line alive. We have both the power and the responsibility to determine what seeds will grow into the next world.